Do you ever wonder where we go when we die? When we finally kick the bucket, hopefully at a ripe old age, tucked up in bed surrounded by people we love, what, if anything, comes next? Though there is no scientific evidence for life after death, the belief in some kind of afterlife is strong in many people. TV and film have had their fair share of on-screen depictions of heaven, hell, and everything in between. But what does literature have to say about the afterlife? Are writers inspired by religious and cultural beliefs, or do they come up with their own speculations? Which are the most popular books about the afterlife? And why are we so obsessed with life after death in general? Before we dive right into any of that, let's first take a look at the most widely accepted afterlife beliefs. Part 1. Most common theories of life after death, aka the good place versus the bad place.
In the afterlife, there's a good place and there's a bad place. You're in the good place.
Many Christians believe that after death, they will be taken into the presence of God and judged for the deeds they have done or failed to do during their lifetime. Heaven is seen as a reward of eternal life and happiness for those who have been good and faithful to God, while hell is seen as a place for unrepentant sinners and atheists, often depicted as a place of eternal fire, pain, and suffering. Some believe heaven and hell are physical places, while others think they're a state of mind. Roman Catholics also believe in a place called purgatory, where sins are punished and the soul is purified before going to heaven. Other Abrahamic religions also believe in similar concepts of heaven and hell, or a good place and a bad place, though sometimes under different names. Islam teaches that those who have performed more good deeds than bad will enter Jannah, a garden of everlasting bliss, while those who have done more bad than good will enter Jahannam, a place of physical and spiritual suffering. Hindus, on the other hand, believe that humans are in a cycle of death and rebirth called samsara. When a person dies, their Atman, or soul, is reborn in a different body. Hindus believe in karma, or intentional action, and many believe that good or bad actions in life lead to positive or negative merit, which determines the Atman's rebirth. Some Hindus believe that humans may be reborn in animal form if they have repeatedly failed to learn lessons in human form. Living life according to teachings in the scriptures will eventually lead to moksha, which is the escape from the cycle of reincarnation. Buddhists also believe in the cycle of samsara. Their belief is based on the tradition that Buddha remembered his past lives when he reached enlightenment. Like Hindus, Buddhists believe in karma and that good actions during life will result in a better rebirth, while bad actions will have the opposite effect. Once nirvana, or enlightenment, is achieved and the enlightened individual physically dies, Buddhists believe that they will no longer be reborn. These four religions are the most commonly practiced in the world, and clearly they share some similarities and differences. But it's important to remember that beliefs can vary even within individual religions. Considering there are an estimated 4,000 religions in the world, the number of afterlife theories is essentially endless. However, there's another huge group of people we haven't addressed yet. With over 1 billion people in the world having no religious affiliations, it would be easy to assume that these people do not believe in any kind of heaven, hell, reincarnation, or rebirth. But even people who are agnostic or atheist often believe in some kind of afterlife. For some people, near-death experiences, a sense of déjà vu, or seeing or speaking to ghosts or spirits through a medium, can be enough to convince them that there is life beyond death. Some believe in what one academic calls an unreligious afterlife, referring to a natural continuation of human consciousness after physical death. With this being said, there is still a small proportion of people who do not believe in life after death, who simply think that when we die, and there is absolutely nothing after. Now that we know the most common afterlife theories, it's time to look at them in relation to literature. Let's take a step back to medieval times, to a man who gave us one of the earliest written depictions of heaven, hell, and purgatory. Part 2. Dante and his 700-year-long influence on the afterlife in popular culture. The Divine Comedy by Italian poet Dante Alighieri is largely considered one of the greatest works of literature ever. Completed in the year 1320, around 12 years after he started writing it, Dante's lengthy poem is an allegory for the soul's journey towards God. It's split into 3 sections: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Dante narrates the Divine Comedy in the first person as he journeys deep into the 9 realms of hell, led by Virgil, a poet of Roman antiquity admired by Dante in real life. Following this, he travels through Purgatory, and then through the spheres of heaven, led by Beatrice, based on a woman Dante longed for in real life, until eventually he comes face to face with God.
I'm God. Bingo!
Inferno is undoubtedly the most famous of the three sections and the one most referenced in popular culture, probably because it is also the strangest and scariest. As Dante travels through hell, he witnesses some obscene punishments. This is an excerpt describing the fate of fortune tellers in hell.
They had their faces twisted toward their haunches and found it necessary to walk backward because they could not see ahead of them. And since he wanted so to see ahead, he looks behind and walks a backward path.
That's right, their heads are on backwards. Several other haunting punishments are described, as well as the overall disturbing landscape of hell. Combined, this is enough to frighten anyone into being good. Numerous film adaptations of Inferno have been made, including this one from 1911. The full version of this is available on YouTube, so if you want to see some truly bizarre things, then I definitely recommend checking it out. I've no idea how the creepy human-eating devil turned into this 100 years later, but I think it's an excellent improvement. Geoffrey Chaucer, John Milton, E.M. Forster, T.S. Eliot, Alfred Tennyson, and many others have all been inspired in one way or another by Dante. Karl Marx used a paraphrase of a line from Purgatory in the first edition of Das Kapital in 1867. Follow your own road and let the people talk. One of Inferno's most famous quotes,
"Abandon all hope, ye who enter here,"
has been cited time and time again, including on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disney, in the video game World of Warcraft, and even in a song by rock band The Gaslight Anthem.
All hope abandon, ye who enter here.
In more recent years, the Divine Comedy has been referenced by writers Stephen King in Wizard of Glass, Bret Easton Ellis in American Psycho, Jodi Picoult in The Tenth Circle, Philip Pullman in The Amber Spyglass, and Dan Brown in his 2013 novel, which he literally titled Inferno. Even if you've never read a single line of the Divine Comedy, you've almost certainly been influenced by it. Through the power of his words, Dante helped create the very idea of the Italian language that's spoken today. He chose to write in Florentine Tuscan, the language of the ordinary people, rather than Latin, which was reserved for serious literary works. This allowed his ideas to take root much more widely. Dante condemned many aspects of Roman Catholicism, including the buying and selling of indulgences. He presented an entire line of popes burning eternally in hell for crimes such as this. Interestingly, the Divine Comedy wasn't popular in the English-speaking world until poet William Blake, who made several illustrations for it, advocated strongly for the text. Dante's Divine Comedy brings together literary and theological expression, both pagan and Christian, filling in what the Bible leaves out with his visions of heaven, hell, and purgatory. He paved the way for the Renaissance, for the Reformation, and for modern discourse about the afterlife. It's hardly surprising that so many other writers have adapted, referenced, stolen from, or simply found inspiration in Dante's work. In referring to the two spiritual guides, Virgil and Beatrice, journalist and editor Christian Blauvelt says that Dante's view of the afterlife is coloured by authorial wish fulfillment. Dante gets a personal tour from his father figure of a literary hero and the woman on whom he had a crush. In other words, Dante presents the afterlife as he'd like to see it himself. Keeping this notion in mind, let's move on to Part 3, the subjectivity of the afterlife in literary texts. The idea that the afterlife is unique to each individual, or that the deceased can have some control over their experiences in the afterlife, is an important aspect in several literary texts. The 2002 best-selling novel The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold is narrated from the first-person perspective of 14-year-old Susie Salmon, who was raped and murdered. In her descriptions of Susie's heaven, Sebold suggests that to some degree, the dead can influence their surroundings. Our heaven had an ice cream shop, where, when you asked for peppermint stick ice cream, no one ever said it's seasonal. It had a newspaper where our pictures appeared a lot, and it made us look important. It had real men in it, and beautiful women too, because Holly and I were devoted to fashion magazines. Susie's version of the afterlife contains most of the things she enjoyed on Earth, and is a painful reminder of her young age. While ice cream and fashion magazines were once her only concerns, now she is preoccupied watching her family grieving and her murderer getting away with his crimes. In her article, The Trouble with Post-Mortality, Elizabeth Tallant says, "The banality and insularity of her heaven mirror the qualities of her mind. An afterlife in which the failings and limitations of one's own mind determine one's environment could seem hell rather than heaven. But the reader is meant, I think, to accept that the point of Susie's heaven is to offer her the optimum setting in which to deal with earthly trauma. The 2009 movie adaptation was relatively true to the novel, although director Peter Jackson decided to portray Susie's heaven as less personal to her interests and experiences and more abstractly beautiful, using vibrant colours and textures to create totally surreal landscapes.
She's here.
What?
Susie. Susie's in the in-between.
Though it appears to be heaven, Susie is in fact stuck in a kind of in-between land, unable to reach true heaven, which she refers to as wide, wide heaven in the book, until her business on earth is finished and she is ready to move on from the trauma which is holding her back. Only then can she leave the in-between, which is in constant flux due to her troubled emotions, and reach a place where her psychological state is forever at peace.
Have you seen Holly? Did she tell you about this place? Yes. Then you must be ready. It's beautiful. Of course it's beautiful. It's heaven!
Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, released in 2007, marked the end of an era for the Harry Potter series, and might not be one that automatically comes to mind when we think about literature about the afterlife. But Rowling's concluding novel features a chapter in which Harry appears to be dead, having just given himself up to Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest. He wakes up in a large, white, empty place where he has a conversation with deceased Hogwarts headmaster Dumbledore.
Where would you say that we are?
Well, it looks like King's Cross Station. Only cleaner. And without all the trains.
King's Cross, is that right? This is, as they say, your party.
Like Alice Sebold, Rowling seems to be suggesting here that our subconscious has some control over the afterlife, or at least the liminal space between life and death. Harry envisions King's Cross Station because it's such a significant location in his life and holds many happy memories for him, especially as it always marked the beginning of his journey away from the horrible Dursleys and towards what he felt was his true home, Hogwarts.
I have to go back, haven't I?
Oh, that's up to you.
I have a choice.
Oh, yes. We're in King's Cross, you say? I think if you so desired, you'll be able to board a train.
And where would it take me?
On.
King's Cross also forms a point of unity between the magical and muggle worlds, acting as a sort of in-between space, which makes it only fitting that Harry also appears there when he is between life and death. Although some writers choose to bless their characters with personalised, adjustable afterlife environments, it's clear that others offer more rigid suggestions of what comes next. Devout Christian author C.S. Lewis, famous for his Narnia series, wrote a novel in 1945 called The Great Divorce, an allegorical story in which a nameless protagonist finds himself on a journey between purgatory and heaven. The narrator arrives in a grey, joyless town. He boards a bus for those who desire an excursion to some other place. The bus turns out to be bound for the foothills of heaven. When it reaches this destination, the bus passengers realise that they're ghosts. They're in awe of the beautiful land in front of them and the bright, shining figures they meet there, who urge them to repent and offer to help them to reach heaven if they do. Almost all of the passengers choose to return to the grey town rather than abandon their sins, such as vanity, greed, and pride. The narrator is met by the writer George MacDonald. The narrator hails MacDonald as his mentor, just as Dante did when meeting Virgil, and MacDonald becomes the narrator's guide in his journey, just as Virgil became Dante's. The narrator asks MacDonald if any of this has been real. MacDonald says it is, but it's just presented in a different form than on Earth. The narrator, he explains, has not died yet, but he should go and tell others what he has seen. The narrator wakes up from his dream. Yep, it was all a dream. It's worth mentioning that at the beginning of the novel, Lewis states, "The transmortal conditions are solely an imaginative supposal. They are not even a guess or a speculation at what may actually await us. The last thing I wish is to arouse factual curiosity about the details of the afterworld." Lewis acknowledges that his book is by no means an accurate portrayal of life after death, and highlights that people shouldn't take them as truth, nor make their own assumptions about the afterlife. The Great Divorce does, however, support the moral-based belief that it matters how we live. Our actions in life determine where we end up in death, and only those who sin won't progress from purgatory to heaven. Let's take a look at another afterlife book. Elsewhere by Gabrielle Zevin is a 2005 novel which, like The Lovely Bones, also features a newly dead teenage girl protagonist. 15-year-old Liz dies in a cycling accident and wakes up on a boat which takes her to a land called Elsewhere, a place which functions almost exactly as life as we know it here on Earth. For Liz, though, the normality of it is frustrating. So this is Elsewhere, she thinks. Liz sees a place that looks like almost any other place on Earth. She thinks it's cruel how ordinary it is, how much it resembles real life. There are buildings, houses, stores, roads, cars, bridges, people, trees, flowers, grass, lakes, rivers, beaches, air, stars, and skies. How entirely unremarkable, she thinks. Elsewhere could have been a walk to the next town, or an hour's ride in the car, or an overnight plane trip. As they continue to drive, Liz notices that all the roads are curved, and that even when it seems like they're driving straight, they're actually going in a sort of circle. Although Elsewhere seems to be just like Earth, there are two main differences which set it apart. First, certain people can talk to animals, which is pretty cool. And secondly, everyone ages backwards, which is even cooler. From the age you were when you died, you get younger and younger until you finally reach age 0, at which point you float down a magical river and are reborn as a baby on Earth. The cyclical nature of life in Elsewhere is hinted at on several occasions, such as the circular roads. Elsewhere seems to be inspired by the belief in reincarnation, not unlike the cycle of rebirth, samsara, a belief of Hinduism and Buddhism. However, Zevin gives no indication of whether your behaviour affects what kind of rebirth you have. She also seems to suggest that Elsewhere is the only afterlife for both good and bad people. The normality of the environment, as well as the element of backwards aging, do not reflect the Christian concept of heaven, which is described as paradise for the soul to rest in for eternity. Sadly, this book hasn't been turned into a film yet, but I'm anxiously awaiting the day that somebody picks it up, because I think it could be a really interesting Benjamin Button-esque movie. Part 4. Why are we so obsessed with death and the afterlife? People who've had a near-death experience are often the most fervent believers in an afterlife. There are a surprising number of books written by people who claim to have been to heaven and back. Heaven is for Real is a 2010 Christian novel written by Todd Burpo about his 3-year-old son Colton's near-death experience, in which he claimed to have left his body during surgery, gone to heaven, met Jesus riding on a horse, sat on his lap and had angels sing to him. Considering roughly 70% of Americans believe in heaven, it's no surprise that the book was an instant hit, selling over 10 million copies across the world and sparking a movie adaptation. There are a number of similar books: 90 Minutes in Heaven, Miracles from Heaven, Proof of Heaven, etc., etc. In 2015, the Christian fiction genre was struck by a dramatic turn of events when Alex Malarkey, a boy with a similar story to Colton Burpo's, publicly recanted his own story and best-selling book, The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven. He stated that his near-death experience as a child was fictional and a cry for attention. He condemned Christian publishers and bookstores for selling popular heaven tourism books, which he said profit from lies. Why do people continue to lap up these apparent true story afterlife books? Or in fact, any book, fiction or non-fiction, which depicts life after death? Critic Jonathan Bassett suggests that film portrayals of life after death represent a supplement or alternative to traditional religious sources that people can use as a mechanism for contemplating metaphysical questions about the feasibility and nature of the afterlife. So if films can supplement traditional religious sources, then surely literature can too. For religious people, reading these kinds of books can reaffirm their existing belief in the eternal soul, whether that's evident in the existence of heaven, paradise, or a cycle of reincarnation. And for non-religious people, they are still valuable in fulfilling a curiosity which lies within all of us. The fear that we feel towards death, concerning both ourselves and our loved ones, is undoubtedly so strong due to the element of uncertainty. If we knew for a fact that after death our consciousness lived on in another realm, death wouldn't be nearly as frightening, because it wouldn't be the end. For some people, the prospect of there being nothing at all after death is even worse than the idea that hell is real. So, what can we learn from literature about the afterlife? Firstly, that many of the oldest and most commonly practiced religions, such as Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, regularly form the basis of literature about life after death and the eternity of the soul. In particular, Dante's ideas in his Divine Comedy inspired a lot of later literature about hell, purgatory, and heaven. Without a doubt, scientists and researchers will continue to investigate human consciousness and whether it can go on existing even when our bodies fail. Religions across the world will continue to teach their individual convictions. But afterlife literature is changing. Though we were once fixated on what religious texts such as the Bible have to say about life after death, writers are increasingly offering new, original, and creative hypotheses. Even if we don't believe their assumptions are accurate, their words alone are often enough to quell some of our anxiety about dying, at the same time as stoking the burning curiosity we all feel when we wonder what comes next. What do you think about literature inspired by the afterlife? Do you agree with any of the theories presented in the texts I've discussed? Perhaps you believe in something else entirely, or maybe in nothing at all. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.